Hi everyone, Carter Krishnaiyer here for Beyond the 90. As first reported by our Alex Ashton, at least in terms of Beyond the 90 is concerned, and widely reported, I think, at the same time throughout the social media verse and different soccer reporters. The U.S. Open Cup this year, coming year in 2026, is going to look very, very different than it has in the past. And it's not just because we're not going to have full participation from Major League Soccer, which has been an issue the last two seasons and was an issue for many of you. You may not remember this. It was an issue in the mid 2000s where MLS teams would play a play-in tournament. Or at least some of them would be in a play-in tournament to determine who was actually in the U.S. Open Cup proper. They had their own qualifying format. So this is a first now in terms of USL and lower professional divisions not having full participation. So the new format, as you can read in Alex's article on Beyond the 90, he first reported it on Wednesday. He then has the full format on our site on Thursday at beyondthe90.net, is that you will have 16 teams from Major League Soccer. And keep in mind, Major League Soccer has 27 U.S.-based teams, right? 3 Canadian-based teams. So the 3 Canadian-based teams are ineligible to be in the Open Cup. So there are 16 U.S.-based MLS teams, 17 U.S.-based USL championship clubs. That leaves out 8 teams for next season. 2 of which are expansion teams, Sporting Jacksonville and Brooklyn, but that leaves out then 6 teams that were, North Carolina FC has obviously dropped, so 6 other teams, the 6 teams that are returning and did not make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference or finished below Lexington, the 9th place team in the Western Conference, they are not part of the Open Cup this coming year. So that means Monterey Bay, Las Vegas, Oakland, Birmingham, Tampa Bay, Miami, and Indy 11. Those 7 teams. And Indy 11, of course, a club that has, in particular, a decorated Open Cup history. As recently as 2 seasons ago. Made it all the way to the semifinals of the Open Cup. So very, very disturbing in some senses. And I think very devastating for those clubs, fans, and for the ownership in many of those places. Now, I was in this position in 2011 as the communications director for the North American Soccer League. Our teams, as I think I've explained previously, excuse me for a second, I had to scratch my eye, apologies for that. I was in this position in 2011. I think I've explained it before that we lost sanctioning because of some of our problems with the Carolina Railhawks, the forerunner of North Carolina FC, same club. And as a result of that, we only regained full sanctioning after the Open Cup draw was set. So we were out. Our 6 U.S.-based teams were out that season. We had 8 teams, but that included Edmonton and Montreal, which were Canadian-based teams. So we were out of the Open Cup that year. We returned in 2012 with a bang on Carolina, future North Carolina FC. They beat the Galaxy. Seattle Sounders. Tampa Bay beat Seattle the next year. Real Salt Lake lost to Minnesota United. And I think we had another win. Did Fort Lauderdale beat No, Fort Lauderdale took San Jose to the distance out in San Jose, but they lost. But I think they took them it was a 3-2 loss. So we did quite well after the 1-year hiatus. But the 1-year hiatus hurt the league. It even hurt us in signing some players. So this is a concern now for some of these USL championship clubs. In terms of USL League One, they will have 13 teams, which are the 13 returning teams in the Open Cup. That means all of the expansion teams are out, including Boise, who I think are going to have a very good roster and contend for the title in USL League One immediately. And Sarasota Paradise, who I think are in the process of putting together a good roster. So that's unfortunate for those clubs and those owners. The 2 MLS Next Pro independent clubs, fully independent clubs, Carolina Core and Chattanooga FC will be in the Open Cup. So you still have the possibility of a Chattanooga derby like we had this past year, but otherwise a lot to not like about this. So how are clubs reacting? Talking to some clubs and people who are club adjacent today, there's a little bit of shock. There's disappointment. For the clubs that are still in it, there's relief because they knew something was afoot. I was told there was knowledge that something may have been afoot as early as September in terms of the format change because of the World Cup year, because of the U.S. Soccer Federation's commitment around hosting the World Cup. And this being announced the day before the World Cup draw is made in Washington, D.C. is meant to get it out of the way. Now, it is also potentially a relief to some clubs who don't anticipate going very far but don't want the additional travel. So, for example, Loudoun County had to go out to LAFC, I think. Was that maybe that was 2 years ago, but still, there have been trips like that. Lou City had to go out to, now those two clubs are both in it, actually, Loudoun and Lou City, but this Lou City had to go out to Seattle last year. But this is just an example of what might happen, the sort of trips you might have to make in the Open Cup, even though they try and regionalize stuff. And I think Mr. Applegate, who is the commissioner of the U.S. Open Cup, who I think very highly of, he's one of the people in the U.S. Soccer Federation I think the most highly of. Even though he's tried to regionally balance it, sometimes there's an extra club or a deficit of a club in a given region. And that means Lou City, Loudoun, clubs like that are shipped out of their region. And then that travel can get really messy and you're booking it on short notice and it's not ideal. So there are some clubs saying, okay, well, at least we won't have to deal with that. At least our budget, at least we have a better sense of our budget because we will know how many USL Championship games there are. We will know how many USL Cup games there'll be. All of that has not been finalized yet, but pretty much they know. And we kind of know the parameters of the schedule if we're out of Open Cup. So that's one piece of this. Now, another piece of this that's very important to understand is that there is suspicion. When I talk to people around USL clubs, that USL as a league, now they're facing some labor strife, they're facing all of the problems with the USL Players Association and over negotiations over the new CBA that we've discussed already. But there is some concern that USL itself, as a league HQ, has decided not to pick this fight with U.S. Soccer, even though Open Cup is more important to USL clubs than they are to other clubs. I should mention there are going to still be 16 amateur clubs coming through amateur qualifying right now in the Open Cup. That's potentially less than you usually have if you include all of the qualifiers historically from from USL League 2, the one UPSL qualifier, and then the qualifiers from NPSL. So open qualifying is generally, depending on the year, because we've seen so many format changes, but generally you get 32 teams out of the amateur ranks, whether they come out of open qualifying or whether they come out of some sort of assigned spot to an adult amateur league. That's gone now. So for this year, so 16 amateur teams, 48 professional teams, 64 teams in the tournament, really watered down, really kind of not even an Open Cup. You can't call it an Open Cup because it really isn't open, except for those clubs coming through open qualifying. So back to what I was saying. I got off on a tangent because I didn't explain the amateur piece. I am told that it is suspected. Now, I cannot confirm this, but I'm going to continue to sniff around. It is suspected by multiple people I've spoken to today, tangentially or directly associated with USL Championship clubs, that USL as a league HQ wants to pick its fights with the U.S. Soccer Federation because of its need to get Division I sanctioning with the new D1 coming online, and its need to get some pro standards revised, pro league standards revised in order to put promotion and relegation in place. So this goes along the lines of some of the things going on in USL. We know that the labor strife is at a pretty high level. We saw the players and their views during the recent championship final, the Tulsa-Pittsburgh match about a week and a half ago. And we're now seeing that USL is so fixated on the idea of a Division I league to ostensibly compete with MLS and to bring in higher franchise fees in bigger markets, in the places like Chicago that we know they're sniffing around, Baltimore, they're sniffing around. They've already got a team in Dallas now that's going to enter the championship, but we presume will be a D1 team when that league launches, among others. That they, unlike 2 years ago when the Open Cup was watered down and USL as a league heroically took a very strong stand about it, and Paul McDonough was on the record talking to Paul Tenorio of The Athletic and others about what needed to be done, and that this was a critical fight for USL. And in fact, from what I reported at the time and continue to hear in the aftermath of that, it brought USL owners and the USL League office and USL's players together in a way they had never been together before. And they fragmented since. But the fight over preserving the Open Cup and keeping open access to the Open Cup and keeping the Open Cup alive brought all the parties, all the disparate factions of USL together at the club owner level, at the league level, and at the player level. That's not happening this time. So, whether we ever get the full US Open Cup, the fully participatory and Open Cup back, I'm not sure. This may not be a one-year thing. Let's keep an eye out on this. And plus, remember, MLS is shifting its calendar in 2 seasons anyway.